Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our usual forum here where we talk to experts about foreign policy, military affairs, diplomacy in our study area, and that study area is conflicts known as frozen conflicts around the Black Sea, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and the Caucasus. My name is Professor Christopher Chambers. I am chair of the International Conflict Resolution Center in Washington, D.C. We are dedicated to providing research facilities and ideas and advice on these frozen conflicts. We are non-affiliated, we are not for profit, and we do not get any support from any state actors, et cetera, et cetera. Today, I am privileged and honored to talk to our guest, Dr. Stephen Blank, who is a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute's Eurasia program. However, he has had a storied career with many think tanks, many scholarly pursuits, written many monographs, essays, and articles on the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, and Russia is currently constituted, even foreign policy and military affairs and security issues relating to Russia, including the Caucasus are one of our areas, Central Asia, of course, one of our areas, China, and even the African continent. So without further ado, I want to welcome Dr. Blank. How are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me.
Great. I'm going to jump right into it then. The United States and Russia are competing on various levels, including cyberspace, including our own fractured domestic policy. Now, Russia has sought to protect and project its influence on its former states or colonies, whatever you want to call them, independent nations now, that President Putin likes to refer to as within their privileged sphere of influence. Now, they have done so by creating or maintaining these conflicts in places like Moldova, Ukraine, obviously, Georgia, and Nagorno-Karabakh on the Armenian or Azerbaijan border. Should these frozen conflicts, these little zones, because they seem little, let's say to the average American, be a cornerstone of American foreign policy with Russia, or are they a sideshow, or are they something that need to be integrated fully into a more comprehensive policy?
I would actually pick the last alternative of the three. They're certainly not sideshows. I think we can dismiss that out of hand. But they do need to be integrated into a comprehensive American, and for that matter, European foreign policy towards Russia and the other post-Soviet states that are involved. I would also dispute the idea that these are frozen conflicts. Frozen conflict means that the fighting is not going on. Ukraine fighting is going on every day. People are being killed every day. And as a matter of fact, as part of the last Ukraine crisis that may have just ended, because there's no certainty about that. One of the tactics the Russians used was to ratchet up the level of fighting and killing of Ukrainian soldiers. As for Nagorno-Karabakh, we had a war last year, 6 weeks, which was fairly decisive, although not conclusive. Azerbaijan won, got back much of the territory it had lost. It proved that it was a superior military competitor vis-a-vis Armenia. And that was a real war. That was not just people behind lines. Moldova is frozen. That would be a fair description of it. And we also see in Georgia, there has been no formal resolution of the conflict that led to the war in August of 2008. That's already 13 years. So that's the source of the term frozen, but that's not necessarily a correct description if you go looking at these things individually, one by one.
Right, right.
As for American foreign policy, the last several administrations, and this is, I believe, a bipartisan failing, have essentially ignored the Caucasus. As a result, when the war broke out in September, or between Armenia and Azerbaijan, we were out of the picture, and we still are. As long as we're out of the picture, the protagonists and Russia and Turkey, which are the key actors here, really do not have to pay much attention to what we want and say, because we have no way of influencing the action, and they can come to terms on their own or sponsor the smaller states as they wish, or if they wanted to, they could actually physically intervene rather than just sending proxies. Ukraine, on the other hand, is critical to the security of Europe. And furthermore, we have a treaty with Ukraine. We have an agreement. It's not really a formal treaty, legally speaking, but it's a treaty that said that we would, assure the security of Ukraine, or take steps to see to it that Ukraine remains secure. And we fell down and did nothing about it. Furthermore, the attack on Ukraine in 2014 and the continuing encroachments by Moscow right up to the present represent a threat not just to Ukraine or to post-Soviet states in general, but to the entire post-Cold War order. And they also involve threats to the international freedom of navigation. Russia has unilaterally seized the Kerch Straits in the Sea of Azov.
Right.
It has also now declared the Black Sea off limits for 6 or 7 months, till the end of October, which is a violation of every kind of agreement on international freedom of the seas. And they have said, we're going to be doing military exercises here for 6 or 7 months, nobody can come in. And they have armed the Black Sea Fleet and the ground air forces, and for that matter, their electronic warfare capabilities to the teeth, including with nuclear capable missiles. And basically have annexed the Crimea and said, we can do as we please here. And there's nothing you can do about it. And this is Mare Nostrum, it's our sea. Now, this is beginning to get pushback, not only from NATO as such, but from the other littoral states. And it is pushback that the United States ought to support, because what's at stake here is what the Biden administration calls the liberal order of the international order of liberal principles and so on. That's not the exact term, but we know what we're talking about. The rules-based order, that's the term. And it reflects Moscow's basic modus operandi, that basically we make the rules, and if we don't like your rules, we're going to flout them, and there's nothing you can do about it. And other states are inspired by that kind of behavior. So Ukraine is certainly a critical security interest for Europe and the United States. I would argue that Nagorno-Karabakh should be a more important interest for the United States, but obviously going back to the Bush administration, subsequent administrations have not seen fit to intervene diplomatically on a regular basis in the Caucasus for peacemaking or for other purposes. And as a result, we're now out of the picture.
Well, Dr. Blank, let me take Ukraine first in more detail, and then we're going to go back to the Caucasus, most definitely. President Zelensky of Ukraine has said recently that this so-called Normandy format is a decent model, if you will, for some kind of negotiations, for some kind of ceasefires and ratcheting down the confrontations, even the deaths. This death by 1,000 cuts, basically, that Moscow, excuse me, is putting upon them. Do you agree with that? I mean, and what do you feel the United States must do specifically in terms of policy with regard to Ukraine?
Okay. First of all, I have to disagree with that. The Normandy format has shown itself to be utterly useless, as has the Minsk Treaty. Zelensky is now still trying to get a summit with Vladimir Putin, but you have to ask yourself, what are they going to talk about? Because Putin's going to deny that Russia has anything to do with it. This supposedly, from the Russian point of view, is a civil war, and it's up to Ukraine to commit suicide in order for the civil war to end. Essentially, what Moscow wants Ukraine to do is to turn over its government to people who are pro-Russia and destroy Ukrainian independence, and for that matter, sovereignty and territorial integrity. It wants Ukraine specifically to convert itself into what political scientists would recognize as a confederacy, not a federal state. Federal states are actually quite strong, like the United States. But
Right.
a confederacy is a very weak state. And in our own experience, as your listeners will readily understand, the Confederate States in Civil War was a very weak union. It was unable to function effectively as a government and paid the price. The same thing would be true for Ukraine. There would always be a pro-Russian voice there. Nothing could be done. And the country would be essentially a satrapy or client state of Russia. That's what Moscow wants. Ukraine is not going to give that to Moscow. The only way Moscow can get this is by force. And the Normandy agreements, France and Germany do not accept the idea, do not want to believe that Russia is at war with Europe. Unfortunately, anybody who studies Russian policy, like I have, but doesn't have to have my level of expertise, will recognize from their base, on the basis of Russian activity and Russian rhetoric, and this is freely admitted by Russian experts themselves, Russia is at war with the West and has been for years, and it behaves accordingly. Until France and Germany are willing to accept this, the Normandy format is useless because they are not going to do anything to counter Russian aggression. The only diplomatic mechanism that will work is one where the United States is there with its full panoply of powers in support of Ukraine. Now, so to get to your second question, what can we do? This is what needs to happen. One, I have argued for a long time that we need to have with Ukraine a program like that of the Lend-Lease program in World War II, where we supported Great Britain and the Soviet Union against Nazi Germany. Specifically, what that means, we will lend Ukraine capabilities that we don't need in return for leasing air and naval bases, and for that matter, army bases in Ukraine. The financial elements of this can be worked out as they were then, but they don't have to duplicate what went on in the 1940s, but that's the fundamental principle of this. Second, we should be giving Ukraine the kinds of capabilities it can use credibly, train them, and deploy and give them those capabilities to use against Moscow. I've written about this. I've called, for example, offensive air capabilities, air defense, naval capabilities, anti-naval capabilities against the Russian naval and amphibious deployments in the Black Sea and Crimea, which are staying put to threaten Ukraine. Third, at the same time as this being done, we need to keep the pressure on Ukraine to reform. And for whatever reasons, Ukrainian politics, reform is in trouble in Ukraine. They just fired today the very capable head of Ukrainian gas, Naftogaz. The gas sector was notably corrupt and inefficient. He's turned it around. They had a bad year last year, probably partly because of COVID. Knock-on consequences of that. But he was fired because of Ukrainian politics. The army and the defense industry sector is not reformed enough. Neither is the judiciary. This has to be vigorously put forward. And Ukraine has to be told, you will not get into NATO. You will not get into the European Union, which are ultimate guarantees of its security, until and unless this happens. And of course, the longer this happens, it'll be harder to supply them with military equipment. Beyond that, the United States and Ukraine have to develop a counter-information attack on Russia strategy. The present crisis was triggered because Ukraine moved on Russian information warfare, specifically the TV stations and newspapers of a pro-Russian oligarch in Ukraine named Viktor Medvedchuk. Ukraine and the United States need to step up our cyber and counter-information game against Russia. Everybody else does too, for that matter, but I'm focusing on that specific case. Finally, the Ukraine problem is not just simply bilateral, because it's a threat to all the Black Sea states, including other members of NATO, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, and to partner states like Georgia. To thwart the Russian idea that they can close the Black Sea, I really believe we need to do freedom of navigation operations, not only in the Black Sea, but in the Kerch Strait and the Sea of Azov. and defy Russia to fire on those ships. I
Right.
have no doubt they will do nothing about them. But the principle, just as we're doing in the South China Sea, by the way, the principle of the freedom of navigation and the fact that those other waterways, Sea of Azov and Kerch Strait, were governed by a bilateral agreement between Russia and Ukraine, and the Russians are simply trampling on that with impunity, has to be stopped, and demonstrated that the rule of law does work in international affairs, and that we're prepared to take risks for European security. I doubt very much that Moscow will do much to stop that if we decided to do it. But that's a comprehensive program. Lend-Lease, the encouragement of reform, weapons transfers as part of that Lend-Lease program, regular NATO patrols in and around the Black Sea, plus NATO deployments there, and of course, making it clear that we will not accept closure of these bodies of water. That's a comprehensive strategy.
Specifically, do you think that multilateralism, let's say bringing in the Romanians, bringing in even in the Poles, let's just say, and the Turks definitely, do you think that that would, what kind of influence do you think that would have if we were to say, look, this is our team, and we were to go to Berlin and Paris and say, look, this is our team. Can they be your team too? Will the multilateralism help push the French and the Germans, or do you think it might back them away somehow? I'm just curious what your thoughts on that.
Up until now, the Biden administration has attempted to take a different tack with the Allies than did Trump. But Trump wasn't prepared to do anything for Ukraine. If anything, he bought the whole Russian propaganda line, hook, line, and sinker, as we know. Romania is very anti-Russian. And they are under threat by the Russians because by having seized Crimea, the Russians are now neighbors of Romania. They overfly Romania. This is not well known, but they do that. They are adjacent to Romanian oil fields in the Black Sea, and that's a constant threat. In Bulgaria, we are now seeing, if you are following the news out of Bulgaria, the extent of which the Russians have tried to use Bulgaria as a hunting ground to kill people who are supporting Ukraine and for black operations, basically.
Right.
I also think that with Turkey, we've seen in the last year that the Turkish-Russian entente is cooled. In the last year alone, Turkey used, or Turkish proxies took on Russian proxies 3 times and beat them every time. Nagorno-Karabakh, Syria, Libya. Furthermore, Turkey has cut its import of Russian gas. This is not, again, well known, but it's a fact.
Right.
And they are diversifying their supplies because they do not want to be dependent on Moscow. So they are buying more liquefied natural gas, LNG, from Qatar, Algeria, and the United States in order to safeguard their economic and consequently political independence. Furthermore, they are very close to Ukraine. They support Ukraine. They are transferring to them weapons, including their drones, or the know-how to make them, and those drones are lethally effective, as the previous wars showed.
The Armenians found that out.
Well, it's not just the Armenians; it's in Syria and Libya also.
Yes, exactly.
And Russian military has nothing to defend against it with. The response by the Turkish government to the declaration of the Armenian genocide was by no means as severe as some expected, and it was, and clearly within it was an offer of, let's try to compose our differences. So what needs to happen here is that Romania, Turkey, and Bulgaria need to come together. This was proposed in 2016 by Turkey, and it fell apart because Bulgaria wouldn't do it. But the opportunity is there for the United States to lead. And if the French or the Germans are opposed, they're just going to have to live with that, because I don't think we can go on trying to appease them when they refuse to admit to themselves what is really happening in Europe and are unwilling to accept the fact that the rest of Europe is a threat. The great achievement of the end of the Cold War in Europe is not just the end of the Cold War itself and the collapse of the repressive totalitarian Soviet Empire. It is the establishment in international treaties that European security is indivisible. That what happens in Ukraine does not stay in Ukraine. And that what happens in Belarus Another place we need to be watching does not stay in Belarus. The idea that you can simply pretend that what's going on in Eastern Europe is of no consequence to France and Germany is fundamentally at odds with the victory that Germany and France won, that gave Germany back its full state. At some point in time, we, as the leader of the alliance, have to say, this is an alliance. We're going to take the responsibility and lead this, bringing through diplomacy Bulgaria, Turkey, Romania, plus the other states that will support us. In this case, Greece, Poland, now maybe the Czech Republic, because they've been burned by the Russians as well, and say, this is for real.
Let me ask you, and this is again for people who don't have knowledge of the region, is the the French and German kind of timidness, if you will, is it based on this premise that if somehow Ukraine does join NATO by Article 5, they will be dragged into a war with Moscow because Moscow wants to threaten them? Or is it just something more philosophical about just hands off, or is it just about gas? What are your feelings on that?
There are many reasons here. I remember a few years ago, I was teaching a course in Canada at their Armed Forces College, and a German officer, actually who had been born in what was then East Germany. And he said to me, you have to understand, the German public says, if we have to pay more money for defense, and that means higher taxes, let's be frank. If we have to pay more money for defense, well, we tried that 80 years ago and you see what happened. A lot of them refuse to believe that Russia is the threat it is. They think that they can somehow find a modus vivendi with Putin and with Russia, that in German business, quote, did not want to lose the Russian market. Gas is also important to a lot of these groups. And they, in many places also, they probably have fallen for the Russian line that if Ukraine was a member of NATO, Russia would attack. Now, if NATO decides to take Ukraine in the interval between that announcement and the actual entry, the Russians might well attack. But the Ukrainian army is not the army it was in 2014, and I doubt that anybody in Europe would stand for that now. Quite frankly, the truth is the exact opposite. If Ukraine is a member of NATO, it is less likely that the Russians would test Article 5.
Right. I just wanted to get your, feelings on that.
Yeah, but I'll be frank with you, it's a very tough sell.
Right.
To do that in Europe. And I mean, I've tried it, right? There are people here who believe it, and I understand where that comes from. But I think that the only way you deter Russia is to confront it with a combination of superior force, which you demonstrate that you are willing to use, and robust diplomacy at the same time.
Let me flip down to the Caucasus just for a minute. Some of people that we've spoken to have looked at the Caucasus as almost an end run in terms of enticing Paris and Germany to take a bigger stand or a stronger stand against Putin, because that is the traditional old Silk Road route that is now a gas route. So they could, it would basically bypass Putin. Is there, taking that, for what it is, that economic argument for what it is, what can the United States do in addition to developing trade down there in the Caucasus? What can the United States do to reinsert itself, or insert itself rather, to diffusing that age-old conflict down there between the Azeris and the Armenians, and bring everybody back into in line with what might be said is common sense, that nope, there does not need to be this level of conflict there, and to the point where we now have 2,000 Russian peacekeepers within striking distance of the pipelines.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, it's a very complex problem and a lot of sides to the question. First of all, the United States has to take a strategic decision that being diplomatically present and investing more money in trade and so on in the Caucasus as a whole, and that's also Georgia, by the way.
Yes.
Is in the strategic interest of the United States. And so far, we've had 20 years of bipartisan answers to that question of no, it's not. And when the Trump administration, and when John Bolton came, he got nowhere. The Armenians said, well, we're friends of Iran. So what has to happen is the United States, first of all, has to decide that this is an area where it is very much in the vital interest, and I use that term advisedly, the vital interest of the United States to be involved. Not only because of the oil, by the way, or the gas, but that's certainly important. And if you decide that and take consequential steps to show that you are interested, ready to contribute, ready to play a positive role, and that you are responsive to the demands of the local governments, then you will be able to get in. Now, at the same time, we have to understand that the Armenians and the Azeris hate each other. And I mean hate. I mean, you know.
We were over there in February, and yes,
I mean,
enough
again,
said on that. Yes.
This is a given. Now, this does not mean that mediation is out of the question, but it
Exactly.
does pose serious problems. And again, if you want to play the role of a disinterested or impartial mediator, you have to be willing to put chips on the table for them to take you seriously. And we have not been willing to do that. So if we are willing to do that and we start doing so, then governments will listen to us. At the same time, I would strongly argue for that is very much in the Western, not just American, but Western interest to maximize gas transit, not only from Azerbaijan, which is the country that has a lot of gas, but from Central Asia through the Caspian, or what has been called the Southern Gas Corridor, all the way to Turkey and the Balkans and Europe. That means, again, a strategic approach which includes maximizing the opportunities for Azerbaijan and Central Asian governments that have gas to use the Caspian and then go through Azerbaijan and Georgia, get gas to Armenia so that it's part of the equation, through Turkey, into Greece, build the infrastructure. We have the means to do it, 3Cs initiative, other EU and so on, all the way up to Croatia. There are refineries in Greece and Croatia. You build the pipelines to Albania. If Bulgaria is willing, you can do it there. Romania certainly will play, and so on. And you get that gas up to once the gas gets to the refinery in Croatia, which is on Kirk Island, KRK, that gas can then go to Austria or to Italy, Germany. And you have reduced significantly Moscow's leverage over the entire area, which is founded very much on energy. And you are forcing Moscow to play a market game. You're not eliminating Moscow's exports. That's beyond anybody's capability. But you are changing the nature of the game or the environment in which they have to operate to the benefit of the Balkan countries and the Caucasus countries. And you are integrating them further with Europe. And of course, the United States is godfathering the process. This also means a serious diplomatic engagement with Turkey. I see no way to defend the entire Black Sea area without the active participation of Turkey, which means that the issues on the table between the United States and Turkey have to be negotiated. The solution that may come out may not be everybody's dream solution, but it needs to be a solution that everybody can live with. Again, extremely difficult, but if you don't even try, it gets harder. So again,
well, there was, go ahead, sir, go ahead.
So again, this ties into the Black Sea strategy as well. So you need to do these things in order to thwart Russian aggression and Russian influence across a wide range of Southeastern Europe, the Black Sea, and the Caucasus.
So basically, we're looking at the late 1940s again, a big map and chess pieces yet again. Is that basically where we're, we've just retrogressed back to that? Is that basically where we are?
We have not retrogressed because these countries are now members of the EU or NATO or want to be, or have an affiliation of some sort with them. And the Caucasus states are independent. It's not the 1940s. It's a new game.
Right.
I mean, the map is the same.
Right.
The map isn't even the same, actually. But
That's true.
it's a new game. But there are certain fundamental principles that don't change. And one of them is that the Russian government believes that the only way it can secure its domestic system is by the threat of aggression against its neighbors. As Catherine the Great said, I have no way to defend my frontiers other than to expand them. And that expansion puts the rest of Europe at risk.
I was curious. I have a Turkish student who, and this is just something I'm just throwing out here because it's an interesting kind of what if, who claims that, and again, this is the world through the eyes of a 19-year-old, mind you, that President Biden should have floated the recognition of the genocide to the Armenians in private and said, I am willing to recognize this and give you tons of foreign aid. You just have to get rid of the Russians. Playing that game, I mean, do you think that you're talking about chips on the table, do you think that they would have even entertained a suggestion like that, or would have been it would have infuriated them? And what do you think in terms of chips on the table? Would that have been an interesting chip to play?
You know, when I was 19, and probably when you were 19, we thought we had such simple solutions for this.
Yes. But it was, I mean, it was tantalizing in its simplicity, and that's why I wanted to just see what you.
Too simplistic. Armenia, look, the Armenian government for 100 years, since the genocides, if not before, Armenians have come to the unanimous conclusion that Russia is their only support.
Right.
You're not going to change that by waving a magic wand. You're going to change that by patient, long-term constructive efforts. That's what diplomacy is about. Famous phrase of Henry Kissinger, he called diplomacy the accumulation of nuance. And nuance, right, as we know, as adults, does not happen fast. But right, you have to begin. And if you begin and you act in good faith and you're credible, then you can begin to change things. I think look, I am the son of Holocaust refugees. So I have no problem acknowledging genocide when it exists. And I remember lecturing in Turkey years ago and saying, this happened, you're going to have to admit it, and you'd be better off if you did, because people would not be afraid of you. Nobody in the world today is afraid of Germany.
Right.
But Turkey and Japan are not trusted in many places. Why? Because they have difficulty coming to terms with what they did in World War I and II.
Right. Thank you. I just wanted to see what your feelings were of that, because
the Armenians would have laughed him out of court.
Right. That's what I said. It is what it is. Right. Let me go back to Eastern Europe and Belarus. President Lukashenko's vulnerability domestically with regard, to some of the protests we've seen there. Is that model of Belarus, is that what Putin is looking for? You'd said, that kind of, stripping of Ukrainian sovereignty de jure, or de facto. Is that what he's looking for? Kind of a Belarus
I would, something
model?
Like that. Yes, something like that. There are unconfirmed reports that they're going to announce some sort of union on VE Day, May 9th, against Putin could pose as the gatherer of Russian lands and the rebuilder of the empire. Yes, Lukashenko has played Moscow, and Moscow is tired of subsidizing Belarus. It's an onerous burden, and they want somebody in there who will do as he's told without talking back or evading agreements. And the threat is that Belarus would become a complete satellite of Russia. The revolution here in Belarus shows that the domestic situation is fundamentally unstable, and that the only way that Belarus can be stable is by a democratic government.
And Moldova has shown that too.
Yes,
to some extent.
Ukraine. And for that matter, Russia, because the extent of repression there shows that Putin's main enemy, and now and then people there have said things like that, the main enemy to Russia is not NATO, it's not the United States nuclear arsenal, it's democracy.
Right.
And therefore, a democratic Belarus or a democratic Ukraine is a threat that cannot be accepted. It can't be tolerated. And on the other hand, he knows better than that you just come in there with, all guns flying, so to speak. And he doesn't have the means to do that, especially because people will fight and they cannot afford a protracted war, especially when it's on international media.
Yes.
Yeah. So the situation is to get Lukashenko to give them what they want and get out of there so they can put a lid on the situation rather than have to go in and extinguish the fire forcefully.
Let me ask you internally, you just mentioned domestic politics in Russia. I mean, the Russian economy, is it, as Putin has kind of reconfigured it for siege mentality, is it sanctions proof with regard to the sanctions that we have levied on them? Is it so inward facing that it is sanction proof, or do we really have to go after specifically and surgically this inner circle of oligarchs and other toadies that he has set up? What are your thoughts on that?
The economy is not sanction proof, although it is much more inward focused than was the case a decade ago. And sanctions hurt Russia immensely. If you look into the economic figures, you see that it has cost them hundreds of billions of dollars of growth in the last 7 or 8 years. But sanctions is not a strategy. It's a surrogate for a strategy. It's, it's the first thing you do because you can't think of anything else to do when your child misbehaves or something like that. Part of it, again, is that the allies refuse to accept the nature of the Russian threat, so they're not willing to go further. Nord Stream 2 should be stopped, period. It's not necessary. We have Nord Stream 1, and it's not even being used to 100%. Why do you need another pipeline?
Exactly.
The arguments don't hold water. The sanctions also ought to take on Putin himself and the entourage around him, as you said. But but to be really effective, sanctions have to be part of a broader, comprehensive strategy. And that's where we have failed.
Do you think, switching back, and I'm just going to switch right back to Ukraine, what kind of a stick, we have various carrots to help them, but what kind of a stick do you think we can use in Ukraine to basically, as my father used to say, have them get out of their own way? Particularly with corruption in the judiciary and in the defense ministry, which, those are two organs of their government that they're going to need if they're going to go toe to toe, even diplomatically with the Russians. I mean, is it something where we would have to use some kind of a stick, or is it all carrots with the Ukrainians?
No, the stick is, you people want to be members of European Union and NATO. It ain't going to happen otherwise. Second, you're not going to get the defense support because, the United States Congress is finally, which has been extraordinarily pro-Ukraine on a bipartisan basis, is going to get fed up.
What about, this is a country that has, maybe not as close as Belarus, but I mean, that has a sizable minority of Russians who conceivably, I'm not saying they're all, if each one man, woman, and child is a spy, but is it enough to create in some polls and opinion polls, double digits of support for Putin somewhere? I mean, is that a problem that we need to worry about? That there are a lot of Russians in these countries. I mean, you have some the Russians issuing passports, and some even in Armenia. Is that something internally we have to worry about in terms of formulating some kind of response or a comprehensive policy, or is that just a given we just have to live with?
you have to worry about the Russians issuing passports because it means that they are preparing for an option whereby they can incorporate these territories back into Russia.
Right.
On the other hand, if you can bring about a reunited Ukrainian state, there is no sign of ethnic minority tension in Ukraine. This is propaganda.
Right.
Russian propaganda. The Russian minority has not been maltreated, is not being mistreated. In the Donbass, of course, they're in a war zone and the economy has gone to hell, so they're living terrible lives. But if Ukraine is to recover, it would recover the Donbass, they would probably have to put a lot of money into it to reinvest and bring it up to some sort of basic or better economic level. And I don't think there's going to be any ethnic rivalries like you see in Armenia and Azerbaijan, between where there really is a great deal of animosity. And even there, you know, over the long term, if we play things right, you can reduce that. But again, this is a Russian propaganda canard that they exploit. But as I pointed out, to the Russian imperial mind, and this is true for liberals, conservatives, the idea that Ukraine is an independent state is anathema. And that it's a democratic state is even more of a threat to the mafia-type rulers that Russia has today. Because that's the biggest threat of all to them.
Well, we're going to leave that as the final thought. And I think I think it's the good thesis for the day for you. Thank you so much,
My pleasure.
Dr. Stephen Blank. And again, we will be posting this on our YouTube channel and on our website. If you want to learn more, go to www.icrcenter.org. Again, Dr. Stephen Blank, thank you very much. And you have a great day, and we will be coming back to you. You are a font of information, sir. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Please send me the finished result.
Yes, we will. We will.
Thank you.
Thank you.